Hi, I'm Nathan Crowder, and this is Book Bans, Following a Dangerous Precedent. The concept of banning books has been around in some form for as long as there have been books. The Roman Senate is recording burning books as far back as somewhere between 6 and 8 AD as a new form of punishment. These movements seem to arise throughout history whenever someone seeks to control what knowledge is acceptable and limit the spread of dangerous ideas. While the wave of contemporary book bans in schools and libraries around the United States lacks some of the fervor and theatrics of historic large-scale book burnings, I feel the similarities between current and past movements too significant to ignore. Framed with the stated mission to protect children and when examined through the lens of history, I hope to make a case for why book bans should be undertaken with extreme caution, if at all. In the last few weeks alone, Utah has banned 13 books in public schools statewide. And at the New College of Florida, a dumpster was filled with hundreds of books from their now defunct Gender and Diversity Center in blatant acts of censorship. Despite the public outcry and organized pushback from educators and librarians, the culture that promotes these bans is very active and not likely to slow down anytime soon. This is an ongoing crisis. Proponents of these bans are quick to decry their rights as concerned parents, or at the very least concerned citizens who want to protect children. And while that thought is noble, one can't help but consider exactly what they're trying to protect children from. There can be no denying that dangerous, salacious materials exist in the world that even the most permissive parent would want to protect their children from. With the ready availability of the internet, limiting access to those materials has never been more difficult. But despite these claims, the overall purpose bears striking similarity to historical movements whose now proven intention was to suppress alternative viewpoints and control a cultural narrative in favor of an oppressive worldview. In the past, these kinds of movements have often signaled a government's hard swerve into authoritarian ideology. In Germany, for example, the book burnings of May 10, 1933, heralded the government defining, quote, the purchase of the books of the Jews, except by Jewish customers and Jewish bookshops, an act of treason, only 5 months later. We can only take minimal comfort in the knowledge that more often than not, these efforts ultimately fail. While we look back at the previous attempts at controlling information and the spread of culture, it's inevitable to find history marked by overzealous abuse and totalitarian tactics. But while many of these were clearly an overreach, it does not necessarily mean that their motives or intention was flawed. While it can be easy to point a finger at Nazi book burnings and agree that they are bad, there have been similar, often well-intentioned efforts in this country in just the last 70 years alone. The book Seduction of the Innocent in 1954 by psychiatrist Frederick Wertham spawned national outrage in congressional hearings that led to content norms being established for comic books via the Comics Code Authority. And Tipper Gore's Parents Media Resource Center, PMRC, efforts during the satanic panic of the 80s caused a firestorm of censorship across a wide range of media. And now we're seeing a new wave of book bans on everything from LGBTQA plus materials to critical race theory. The chief similarity in all of these movements, at least on the surface, is the claim of trying to protect children from dangerous influences. But who defines what is dangerous? While the PMRC wanted to shield children from satanic images and glamorization of sex, drugs, and alcohol, it wasn't as if these things were created broadcloth by Ozzy Osbourne in 1980. And while Wertham, in his book, linked violent images and crime and horror comic books to a rise in juvenile delinquency, it wasn't until Wertham's sources were made public in 2010 that it was revealed that he had manipulated, overstated, comprised, and fabricated evidence, especially that evidence he attributed to personal clinical research with young people for rhetorical gain. That cast the validity of a study in some doubt. But by then, the damage had already been done. Some publishers shuttered forever, and the trajectory of comic book publishing was irrevocably altered for decades afterwards. These previous attempts at censorship bear striking similarities to recent efforts to ban books from schools and public libraries. The vast majority of these challenges are mounted on the argument of obscenity, which is understandable. Most rational people would agree that we should protect children from obscenity. Yet, one of the most challenged books across the country is And Tango Makes Three, which is a children's picture book and a true story about a pair of gay penguins at a zoo adopting a baby chick, in which seemingly the only obscenity is a neutral acknowledgement that gay penguins exist. While there are undoubtedly parents who don't like that fact, it is, at the end of the day, a fact, and shielding their children from reality could only be so effective even under the best of circumstances. Another frequent target of challenges in books and programs that examine history and politics of American race relations. Lumped together under the banner of promoting DEI or critical race theory, the central complaint seems to be that examining the history of race in this country is the same as teaching white children to feel ashamed about themselves. It is for this reason that entire departments have been shuttered across the country, most notably in Florida, where Governor DeSantis has made it a hallmark of his administration. It reflects similar attempts to limit books about history and racial justice in the prison system, such as a recent book about the 1971 Attica prison uprising, on the grounds that such material could cause unrest in the incarcerated population. And while it's understandable that people who have benefited from systemic racism might want to avoid the subject, it's unreasonable to think they can somehow prevent their children from learning history for their entire lives. Try as we might, no cause, however righteous, can destroy ideas, nor can they effectively legislate historical facts out of existence. If we're meant to live in a shared society, we should, as a society, find a way to live with subjects of a controversial nature, and free speech absolutists would be quick to agree that we already limit speech in a number of ways. There are numerous laws on the books regarding things like libel and incitement to commit crimes, and those are not generally controversial. Even the most liberal-minded librarian would likely draw the line on freedom to express hate speech. If we are already setting these boundaries, why not apply them to other materials that threaten the moral fabric of communities? This is why I feel it's actually important for schools to engage with these topics honestly and openly rather than pretend they simply don't exist. Ultimately, the job of teachers is to give context. While it's a far from perfect system that can be open to overreach on both sides of the argument, having some sort of educational standards in place would go a long way to helping to establish a national dialogue. Make the lesson plans clear. Notify parents beforehand so they understand the actual material being discussed, and give them an option to opt out of the lessons if absolutely necessary. But don't use the threat of bans to silence the conversation for everyone. It is not the place of schools to teach morals. That's the place of church, community, and home, even if schools will still bear some responsibility to dealing with harmful behavior. If a lesson plan developed by educational professionals can be reliably devised based on a fact-based approach without moral judgment, it would go a long way towards normalizing these conversations on a national and generational level. At the end of the day, we all have to live in the same world with the same facts. And while it is at times a frightening world, understanding it can make it less terrifying. There is still ample room to protect children from the more harmful aspects of society. But to do so, we will first have to confront the idea that inconvenience and uncomfortable truths are not harmful. The easy availability of books allows children to learn and explore at their own pace, while the combined effort of librarians, professional educators, and involved parents who are genuinely invested in their children's learning, we can work together to create an environment that is both safe and educational without resorting to the totalitarian solution of tyrants and despots. Thank you for your time.